The wagon wheels splintered on the rock, and Teresa Voss knew her journey west had just become infinitely more complicated as the axle cracked and sent her tumbling into the dust of the California desert trail. She lay there for a moment, tasting dirt and defeat, her worn calico dress torn at the hem and her auburn hair escaping its pins in wild disarray. The sun beat down mercilessly on this September afternoon in 1878, and she could hear her mare whinnying nervously where she was tethered to what remained of the wagon. Teresa pushed herself up on scraped palms, surveying the wreckage of her possessions scattered across the dusty ground. The carefully packed trunk had burst open, spilling her mother's quilts and the few precious items she owned across the scrubland. She wanted to cry, but tears seemed like a luxury she could not afford. Her aunt's letter had promised work in Quartz Hill, a mining town another day's journey west, but now Teresa sat stranded on a lonely stretch of road with a broken wagon and dwindling supplies. The inheritance from her father's passing had been barely enough to buy this rickety wagon and the supplies for the journey from Missouri, and now even that small investment lay in ruins around her. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up sharply, shading her eyes against the glare. A rider approached from the west, his silhouette dark against the bright sky. Teresa's heart hammered as she scrambled to her feet, brushing futilely at her dusty dress. Strangers on lonely roads could mean salvation or danger, and she had no way of knowing which this might be. The rider slowed as he approached, and Teresa could make out more details. He sat tall in the saddle on a well-built chestnut horse, wearing a weathered Stetson and a dust-colored shirt that had seen better days. A bandana hung loose around his neck, and she noticed he wore his gun low on his hip in the manner of someone who knew how to use it. As he drew closer, she saw a lean, sun-bronzed face with several days' worth of stubble and eyes the color of creek water in summer. "Looks like you have had some trouble," he said, his voice carrying easily across the remaining distance. He reined in his horse a respectful distance away, she noted, neither crowding her nor making her feel threatened. "The wheel caught a rock," Teresa said, hating how her voice wavered. She straightened her spine, meeting his gaze directly despite her disheveled state. The axle broke. The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion and approached the wagon slowly, giving her time to object if she chose. When she said nothing, he crouched beside the broken axle, running his hands over the splintered wood with the assurance of someone who understood such things. His hands were calloused and scarred, she noticed, the hands of a working man. "This is not going to be fixed roadside," he said finally, straightening and removing his hat to wipe his brow. His hair was dark brown, curling slightly where sweat dampened it. "You were heading to Quartz Hill," Teresa nodded, unsure how much to reveal. "My aunt owns a boarding house there. She offered me work." The cowboy studied her for a moment, his gaze neither judgmental nor invasive, simply assessing. "I am heading back there myself. Got a ranch about 5 miles outside town. Name is Harrison Newell." "Teresa Voss," she replied, then added quickly, "I cannot pay you for help, Mr. Newell. I do not have much money left." Something flickered across his expression, though she could not name it. "Did not ask for payment, Miss Voss. But we need to figure out what to do before the sun gets much lower. This stretch of road is not somewhere you want to be after dark." Teresa looked at the wreckage of her wagon, at her scattered belongings, and felt a wave of helplessness she despised. She had come west to start fresh, to prove she could make her own way after her father's death left her with nothing but debts and difficult memories. Now here she stood, dependent on the charity of a stranger before she had even reached her destination. "I can leave the wagon," she said, trying to sound practical rather than defeated. "Take what I can carry on the horse. Harrison shook his head. Your mare is not going to carry both you and enough supplies to make it worthwhile. And these quilts, he gestured to the scattered textiles, look too fine to leave for the coyotes and dust. He was right, though it pained her to admit it. Her mother had stitched those quilts during the long winters, and they represented some of the only beauty Teresa had known growing up. She watched as Harrison walked back to his horse and untied a length of rope from his saddle. "Here is what we can do," he said, his tone matter of fact. "We load what is most important onto my horse. I will walk and lead him. You ride your mare. Tomorrow I will come back with a proper wagon and retrieve the rest, bring it to town for you." "That is asking too much," Teresa protested, even as relief flooded through her. Harrison met her eyes, and she saw something honest and direct in his gaze that made her breath catch. "Miss Voss, out here people help each other. It is not charity, it is survival. Next time I am in trouble, maybe you will be the one doing the helping." They worked in companionable silence as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western hills. Harrison proved efficient and practical, helping her sort through her belongings and pack the most essential items. He handled her mother's quilts with unexpected care, folding them properly before securing them to his saddle. Teresa gathered her clothes, her father's Bible, a few cooking implements, and the small painted music box that had belonged to her grandmother. "You play?" Harrison asked, noticing a battered guitar case among her things. Teresa felt heat rise in her cheeks. "A little. Not well. My father taught me some before he passed." "Quartz Hill could use more music," Harrison said simply, adding the guitar to the load on his horse. As they prepared to leave, Teresa looked back at the broken wagon one last time. It felt like leaving behind the last remnants of her old life, though perhaps that was what she had come west to do anyway. Harrison noticed her expression. "It will still be here tomorrow," he said gently. "I promise I will get the rest of your things to town." They set out as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. Harrison walked beside his laden horse with the easy stride of a man accustomed to long distances on foot. Teresa rode her mare, grateful for the animal's steady temperament. For a while they traveled in silence, but it was not the awkward quiet of strangers. Instead, Teresa found it oddly comfortable, broken only by the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the calls of evening birds settling for the night. "How long have you been in California?" Teresa asked finally, curiosity overcoming her natural reserve. "About 6 years now," Harrison replied, adjusting his hat against the slanting sunlight. "Came out from Texas after the war. Worked cattle drives for a few years, saved my pay, bought some land outside Quartz Hill 3 years back." "You run cattle, some." "Mostly I breed horses. Good horses are always needed out here, and I have more patience for them than for cows." He glanced up at her with a slight smile. "Horses have better sense generally." Teresa found herself smiling in return. "I would not know. I have never been around many animals. We lived in town in Missouri. My father was a clerk." "What brought you west?" The question was casual, but Teresa felt the weight of the true answer. She could offer the simple version, the respectable story, or she could tell this stranger something closer to the truth. Perhaps it was the lengthening shadows or the strange intimacy of walking together through empty country, but she found herself choosing honesty. "My father drank," she said quietly. "After my mother died, he could not seem to stop. He lost his position and the debts piled up. When he passed last spring, I found myself with nothing but those debts and a boarding house landlady who wanted me gone. My Aunt Martha wrote that she needed help and could offer room and board. It seemed like Providence." Harrison was quiet for a moment, and Teresa immediately regretted her candor. What must he think of her now, this penniless girl fleeing scandal and debt? Must have taken courage, he said finally, coming all this way alone. His words surprised her. Not pity, not judgment, just simple acknowledgement. Teresa felt something tight in her chest ease slightly. I do not know about courage, she admitted. Desperation, maybe. I am not very good at any of the things women are supposed to be good at. I cannot sew a straight seam. I burn most things I try to cook, and I am hopeless at all those graceful, refined accomplishments young ladies are meant to have. My aunt's letter said she needed someone strong who did not mind hard work. That, at least, I can manage. Refined is overrated, Harrison said, and there was something in his tone that made her look down at him curiously. Most refined people I have met were also the most useless when things got difficult. The landscape around them gradually changed as they walked, the scrubland giving way to rolling hills dotted with live oaks. In the distance, Teresa could see mountains purple against the darkening sky. The air cooled as evening approached, and she was grateful for the shawl she had thought to drape over her shoulders. Tell me about Quartz Hill, she said, wanting to know what awaited her. Harrison seemed to consider his words. It is a mining town, but it has got some staying power. Not just a flash in the pan camp. There is a real main street, a few stores, a school even. Your aunt's boarding house is one of the nicest buildings in town. Martha Calloway, right? Teresa nodded, surprised he knew her aunt's name. She is good people, Harrison continued. Fair, honest, does not tolerate nonsense. You will be in good hands there. He paused, then added, It is not an easy place, though. Mining towns never are. Men outnumber women 10 to 1, and some of those men have left civilization behind in more ways than just geography. But there are decent folks, too, trying to build something lasting. It sounds better than what I left behind, Teresa said honestly. By the time they saw the lights of Quartz Hill glowing in the distance, full darkness had fallen. The stars overhead were brilliant in a way Teresa had never seen back east, scattered across the sky like diamond dust. Harrison had lit a small lantern that swung from his saddle, casting a warm circle of light around them. The town emerged from the darkness gradually. Teresa could make out the shapes of buildings lining a wide main street, lamplight glowing from windows. Even at this hour, she could hear music and voices carrying on the night air. The largest building at the far end of the street had a sign proclaiming it the Nugget Saloon, and lively piano music spilled from its doors. Harrison led them down a side street to a large 2-story house set back from the main thoroughfare. A painted sign near the gate read, Calloway's boarding house, respectable lodgings for respectable people. Warm light glowed from the downstairs windows, and a well-tended garden flanked the front walk. Before they reached the gate, the front door burst open and a stout woman with iron-gray hair came hurrying down the walk. Teresa Voss, is that you finally? Aunt Martha, Teresa said, suddenly exhausted by the long day as she dismounted. Her legs nearly gave way and she gripped the saddle to steady herself. Martha Calloway reached her in moments, strong arms wrapping around her in a quick, firm embrace. Child, you are half dead on your feet. I expected you 2 days ago. I have been worried sick. Her sharp eyes took in Teresa's disheveled appearance, the dusty torn dress, the scraped hands. What on earth happened? Her wagon broke an axle about 15 miles east, Harrison said, touching his hat brim respectfully. Evening, Miss Martha. Harrison Newell, Martha said, her tone warming. I might have known you would be involved. Bring her things inside, would you? Teresa, come in and sit down before you fall down. The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. Martha ushered Teresa into a comfortable parlor and pressed a cup of hot tea into her hands while Harrison and a young man Martha introduced as her hired hand, Samuel, brought in the items from Harrison's horse. The boarding house was clean and welcoming, furnished with simple but comfortable pieces. Teresa sank into a cushioned chair and felt the day's tension begin to drain away. "I will go back for the rest tomorrow," Harrison was saying to Martha. "The wagon is damaged beyond fixing there, but I can bring the remaining items in my freight wagon." "You are a good man, Harrison," Martha said warmly. "Stay for supper at least. It is the least we can do." But Harrison shook his head, already moving toward the door. "Thank you kindly, but I need to get back to my place. Animals waiting." He turned to Teresa, and their eyes met across the room. "I am glad you made it safe, Miss Voss. Welcome to Quartz Hill." "Thank you," Teresa said, and the words felt inadequate for what he had done. "Truly, Mr. Newell, I do not know what I would have done without your help." Something passed between them in that moment, a connection Teresa did not fully understand but felt nonetheless. Harrison nodded once, touched his hat brim again, and then he was gone into the night. Martha closed the door behind him and turned to study her niece with sharp but kind eyes. "Well, you have had quite an introduction to California. Let us get you fed and into a proper bed. Tomorrow is soon enough to hear the whole story and start getting you settled." That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in weeks, clean and fed and safe, Teresa stared at the ceiling and thought about Harrison Newell. She thought about his steady hands on the broken wagon, the way he had handled her mother's quilts with such care, the quiet competence with which he had solved her problem without making her feel helpless or ashamed. She thought about the way he had said refined was overrated, as though her lack of polished graces was not the fatal flaw she had always believed it to be. She fell asleep with the image of creek water eyes in her mind, and the memory of a kind voice saying, "Out here people help each other." The next morning dawned bright and clear, and Teresa woke to the sound of activity in the house below. She dressed quickly in one of her 2 remaining clean dresses, a simple brown cotton that had seen better days, and tried to tame her unruly hair into some semblance of order. The mirror over the washstand showed her a tired young woman with freckles across her nose and eyes that looked uncertain about what the future might hold. Downstairs, she found the boarding house dining room full of life. A long table dominated the room, and several men sat eating breakfast while Martha moved between the table and the kitchen with practiced efficiency. The men looked up as Teresa entered, their conversations pausing. She felt their curious stares and lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed. "Gentlemen, this is my niece, Teresa Voss," Martha announced. "She will be helping me run this establishment, so I expect you all to show her the same respect you show me. Teresa, these are some of our regular boarders." The men offered greetings, some shy, some bold, all curious. There was a school teacher named Walter, a mining engineer called Phillips, and several miners whose names Teresa struggled to keep straight. They seemed friendly enough, though she was acutely aware of being studied and assessed. After breakfast, Martha put her to work immediately, and Teresa was grateful for the distraction. She helped strip beds and wash linens, scrubbed floors, and began learning the rhythms of the boarding house. The work was hard, but Martha was patient when Teresa inevitably made mistakes, showing her more efficient ways to accomplish tasks. "You will get the hang of it," Martha assured her when Teresa fumbled for the 3rd time trying to make a bed with proper hospital corners. "Goodness knows I did not know how to run a boarding house when I first started either. My late husband and I learned together." "How long have you been here?" Teresa asked, grateful for her aunt's patience. "Almost 12 years now. Came out with Robert in '66, right after the war. He had the prospecting fever, thought he would strike it rich." Martha's expression softened with memory. "He never found his fortune in gold, but he was happy here. When he passed 4 years ago, I decided to stay and make this boarding house my legacy. It is a good life, hard but honest. Around mid-morning, Teresa heard a wagon pull up outside. Her heart jumped, though she told herself not to be foolish. But when she glanced out the window, she saw Harrison climbing down from a freight wagon loaded with her remaining possessions, including the broken wagon itself somehow loaded onto the larger one. Martha noticed her looking. "Go on out and help him, girl. I can finish this myself." Teresa hurried outside where Harrison was already beginning to unload. In the daylight, she could see him more clearly. He was perhaps 26 or 27, she guessed, with weathered skin that spoke of years in the sun. He moved with the unconscious grace of someone comfortable in his own body, and she noticed again the quiet competence in everything he did. "Good morning, Miss Voss," he said, touching his hat. "I got everything, even found a few items that had blown into the brush." "You did not have to do this," Teresa said, though she moved to help him lift a trunk from the wagon. "Already told you people help each other out here." He carried the trunk easily to the front porch. "Besides, I had to come to town anyway, needed supplies from the general store." They worked together to unload the wagon, and Teresa found herself watching him from the corner of her eye. There was something about Harrison Newell that drew her attention. It was not just his appearance, though she would have been lying to say she did not notice the way his shirt stretched across his shoulders or the lean strength in his arms. It was more the sense of steadiness about him, of reliability and quiet strength. When everything was unloaded, Martha came out with a pitcher of cool water and glasses. "You will stay for dinner, Harrison. I insist. It is past noon already and you have been working all morning." This time Harrison did not refuse. Martha set them to work in the parlor, sorting through Teresa's things and determining what could be salvaged and what was damaged beyond repair. Harrison surprised her by producing some tools and setting about repairing a small table that had broken during the crash. "You do not have to do that," Teresa protested, but he just shrugged. "It is a nice piece. Seems a shame to let it go to waste." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, Teresa folding clothes and Harrison bent over the table with careful attention. She found herself stealing glances at him, studying the way concentration furrowed his brow, the way his hands moved with precision and care. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. Harrison looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Sure. Why did you help me, really?" "You could have just ridden past. Most people would have." He set down the piece of wood he was holding and seemed to consider his answer carefully. "My mother died when I was 12, he said finally. "We were traveling to Texas from Arkansas. Wagon broke down and nobody would stop to help. She got sick from exposure, and by the time we made it to the next town, it was too late. My father never forgave himself for not being able to save her, and I never forgot what it felt like to be helpless on that road, watching people pass us by." Teresa felt her throat tighten. "I am sorry." "It was a long time ago," Harrison said, but she could see the old pain in his eyes. "I swore then that I would never be the person who rode past someone in trouble, so when I saw your wagon, I did not even think about it. I just stopped." "I am glad you did," Teresa said softly. Their eyes held for a moment, and Teresa felt something shift between them, some deepening of connection that went beyond gratitude and kindness. Then Martha called them to dinner, and the moment passed, but its warmth lingered. Over the next few weeks, Teresa settled into life in Quartz Hill. She learned the demanding routine of the boarding house, rising before dawn to help Martha prepare breakfast, spending her days cleaning, washing, mending, and cooking. Her hands grew rough from lye soap and hot water, and she fell into bed exhausted every night. But there was satisfaction in the work, in seeing tangible results of her efforts, in Martha's occasional nods of approval. The town itself, was a mixture of rough and refined, chaos and order. Main Street boasted several stores, a bank, a church, and the large Nugget saloon that seemed to operate around the clock. The mining camp spread out around the town proper, a jumble of tents and rough cabins where the prospectors lived. Violence erupted occasionally, usually over claims or cards or women, but the town had a marshal who kept the worst excesses in check. Teresa learned to navigate the stares and occasional crude comments from miners who had been too long without female company. She developed a brisk, no-nonsense manner that discouraged unwanted attention, and word spread quickly that Martha Calloway's niece was not to be trifled with. Most men respected that. Those who did not found themselves banned from the boarding house and facing Martha's formidable wrath. But what Teresa found herself thinking about most was Harrison Newell. He came to town regularly for supplies, and he usually stopped by the boarding house, ostensibly to check on repairs to that table or to return some tool he had borrowed. Teresa suspected he had other reasons, because he always seemed to time his visits for when she might have a few free moments to talk. They would sit on the front porch, watching the bustle of the town, and talk about everything and nothing. Harrison told her about his ranch, about the horses he was breeding, about his dreams of building something lasting. Teresa talked about her father, about her life in Missouri, about the books she loved to read when she had the chance. One afternoon in early October, Harrison invited her to see his ranch. Martha gave her permission to go, with a knowing look that made Teresa blush, and she found herself riding beside him out of town on a horse he had brought for her. "This is Daisy," he said of the gentle bay mare. "She is good-natured and steady. I thought she might suit you." The ride to Harrison's ranch took them through beautiful country, rolling hills giving way to a valley with a creek running through it. Live oaks provided shade, and the grass still held some green despite the dry season. Harrison's property was marked by a simple wooden gate with the brand burned into it, a circle with an H inside. The ranch house was modest but well built, a single-story structure of wood and stone with a wide porch facing east toward the rising sun. Behind it stood a barn, several corrals, and a few outbuildings. As they approached, several horses raised their heads from grazing to watch with intelligent eyes. "It is not much," Harrison said, and she heard uncertainty in his voice for the first time. "It is beautiful," Teresa said honestly, and she meant it. There was something appealing about the solid simplicity of it, the sense of a place built with care and meant to last. Harrison showed her around with obvious pride, introducing her to his horses by name, explaining his breeding program and his hopes for the future. His passion for his work was evident, and Teresa found herself enchanted by this side of him. The way he lit up when talking about bloodlines and temperament, and the perfect conformation of a young colt. "You really love this," she observed as they leaned against a corral fence, watching a mare with her foal. "It is the only thing I have ever been truly good at," Harrison admitted, "understanding horses. They make sense to me in a way most people do not." "I understand that," Teresa said. "Feeling like you are only good at one thing and hoping it is enough." Harrison turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. "You sell yourself short, Teresa. I have watched you these past weeks. You work harder than anyone I know, and you have fitted into this town like you have always been here. That takes strength and adaptability. Those are not small things." Teresa felt warmth spread through her at his words, at the way he said her name without the formal Miss Voss for the first time. "I am not graceful or refined," she found herself confessing, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I am clumsy and plain, and I do not have any of the accomplishments that make a woman admirable. I just work hard because it is the only thing I know how to do." Harrison was quiet for a long moment, and Teresa felt mortification wash over her. Why had she said that? What must he think of her now, this man who was clearly just being neighborly and kind? But then he spoke, his voice low and serious. "You are real, Teresa. You are honest and genuine, and you do not put on airs or pretend to be something you are not. That is rarer than you know. Believe me, I have met plenty of graceful, refined women, and most of them were about as substantial as cobwebs. Give me someone real any day." Their eyes met, and Teresa felt her breath catch. There was something in Harrison's gaze, something warm and intent that made her heart hammer against her ribs. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility, and she thought he might lean closer, might kiss her. But then a horse whinnied loudly, breaking the spell, and Harrison stepped back, looking almost embarrassed. "I should get you back to town before dark. Martha will have my hide if I keep you too late." The ride back was quieter, but not uncomfortably so. Teresa's mind churned with thoughts and feelings she did not fully understand. She had never had a beau, had never really been courted. The few young men who had shown interest in Missouri had lost that interest quickly when they realized she came with nothing but debts and a drunk for a father. She had taught herself not to hope for such things, to focus on survival rather than romance. But Harrison Newell made her want to hope. He made her think that maybe, just maybe, she could have more than just survival. Maybe she could have happiness too. Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. Harrison came to town twice a week, and more often than not, he contrived to spend time with Teresa. Sometimes they walked together to the general store when she had errands. Sometimes he helped her with heavy tasks around the boarding house. Sometimes they simply sat on the porch in the evening and talked while the sun set over the western hills. The other residents of the boarding house noticed, of course, and some teased Teresa gently about her cowboy. But their teasing was kind, and even Martha seemed pleased by the development. "Harrison Newell is a good man," she told Teresa one evening as they cleaned up after supper. "Honest, hardworking, respectful. His mother would be proud of the man he became." "We are just friends," Teresa protested, but even to her own ears the words sounded uncertain. Martha gave her a knowing look. "If you say so, dear, but I have eyes in my head and I see how that young man looks at you. More importantly, I see how you look at him." Teresa felt her cheeks heat. "I do not know anything about courting or romance, Aunt Martha. I do not know what I am supposed to do or how I am supposed to act." "Be yourself," Martha said simply. "That is clearly what he likes about you. Do not go trying to be something you are not just to impress him." In late October, the town held a harvest dance in the newly built community hall. Martha insisted Teresa go, and even produced a dress that had belonged to her years ago, taking it in to fit Teresa's slimmer frame. It was deep green calico, far nicer than anything Teresa owned, and she felt strange and self-conscious in it. "You look lovely," Martha assured her. "Now go and enjoy yourself. You have been working yourself to the bone. You deserve an evening of fun." The community hall was crowded with people, and a small band played energetic fiddle music. Teresa stood uncertainly near the wall, watching couples whirl past. She saw familiar faces from town, miners who had cleaned up and combed their hair, the few other women who lived in Quartz Hill in their best dresses. "Miss Voss." She turned to find Harrison standing beside her, and her breath caught. He had cleaned up too, wearing a pressed shirt and clean trousers, his hair still damp from washing. He looked nervous, she realized with surprise, his hat held in his hands. "You look real pretty," he said, and there was something in his voice that made the simple compliment feel like something more. "Thank you," Teresa managed. "You look nice too. Would you dance with me?" Harrison asked, and now she could clearly see the uncertainty in his eyes, as though he feared she might refuse. "I do not know how," Teresa admitted. "I never learned." "That is all right," Harrison said with a slight smile. "I am not very good either. We can fumble through it together." He offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Teresa took it. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, and she felt a flutter in her stomach as he led her onto the dance floor. The fiddle music was fast-paced, and around them, couples spun with practiced ease. Harrison put one hand on her waist, holding her other hand in his, and they began to move. Teresa immediately stepped on his foot. "I am sorry," she gasped, mortified. "It is fine," Harrison assured her. "Try again." They did, and she stepped on his other foot. Around them, other dancers flowed past gracefully while Teresa felt like an ox in a china shop. She could feel tears of frustration pricking her eyes. "I cannot do this," she said. "I am terrible at it. You should dance with someone else, someone who knows how." But Harrison just pulled her a little closer and kept moving. "I do not want to dance with anyone else, Teresa. I want to dance with you, and who cares if we are terrible at it? Half the fun is in the learning." So they kept trying, and gradually, slowly, Teresa began to catch the rhythm. She still stepped on Harrison's feet occasionally, and they definitely lacked the grace of the other couples, but she found herself laughing as they moved, Harrison grinning down at her with such warmth in his eyes that she forgot to be self-conscious. When the fast song ended and a slower melody began, Harrison pulled her closer, and they swayed together more than actually danced. Teresa could feel the warmth of his body, the solid strength of him, and she rested her head against his shoulder without thinking about whether she should. "You are real," Harrison said softly, his breath stirring her hair. "That is rarer than knowing how to dance." Teresa tilted her head back to look at him, and she saw her own feelings reflected in his eyes. He cared for her. This steady, kind, wonderful man actually cared for her, not despite her rough edges and lack of polish, but somehow because of them. "Harrison," she began, not knowing what she wanted to say but needing to say something. "I am falling in love with you, Teresa," he said quietly, the words coming out in a rush. "I know we have not known each other long, and maybe I should not say it yet, but I am not good at pretending or playing games. I think about you all the time. When I am working, when I am riding, when I am lying awake at night, you are in my head and my heart, and I needed you to know." Teresa felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I did not think this could happen for me. I did not think anyone would want someone like me." "Someone like you is exactly what I want," Harrison said. "You are strong and honest, and you do not give up even when things are hard. You are brave and real and so beautiful it makes my chest ache sometimes just looking at you." And then he was kissing her, right there on the dance floor with half the town watching, and Teresa did not care about any of it. She only cared about the feeling of Harrison's lips on hers, gentle but sure, and the way his arms wrapped around her like he never wanted to let go. When they finally broke apart, Teresa was vaguely aware of applause and some good-natured whooping from the crowd. Harrison was grinning, looking both embarrassed and proud at the same time. "I guess we just gave the town gossips something to talk about," he said. "I do not care," Teresa said, and she meant it. "Let them talk." They left the dance shortly after, walking back toward the boarding house through the cool October night. The stars were brilliant overhead, and Harrison held her hand the whole way. They stopped at the gate, reluctant to part. "Can I come calling on you properly?" Harrison asked. "Court you the right way." "I would like that," Teresa said. "I do not have much to offer yet," Harrison continued, and she could hear the uncertainty in his voice again. "The ranch is still a work in progress, and some years are better than others. But I am building something real. something lasting, and I would like to build it with you if you will have me." Teresa reached up to cup his cheek with her hand, feeling the rasp of stubble under her palm. "Harrison Newell, I do not need much. I came out here with nothing but debts and a broken wagon. What you are offering, a real home and an honest life and someone who sees me for who I really am, that is more than I ever dreamed of having." He kissed her again, softer this time, full of promise and hope. When he finally left, Teresa floated into the house to find Martha waiting up with a knowing smile. "I take it the evening went well?" her aunt asked. "Oh, Martha," Teresa breathed. "I think I am the happiest I have ever been in my whole life." The courtship that followed was sweet and steady, much like Harrison himself. He came to town every Sunday after church, dressed in his best clothes, and sat with Teresa on the boarding house porch. They talked for hours about everything, their pasts and their hopes for the future, their fears and their dreams. Harrison told her more about his years working cattle drives, about the war that had shaped his youth though he had been too young to fight in it, about his father who had died 3 years after his mother and left Harrison alone in the world at 15. He spoke of hard years and hard lessons, of learning to trust his own judgment, of slowly building a life from nothing. Teresa shared her own stories, the good and the bad. She told him about her mother's gentle nature and early death, about her father's slow decline into drink and despair, about the shame of watching everything they owned be sold to pay his debts. She told him about the loneliness of having no friends because her family was too poor and too scandalous, about the relief and terror of heading west alone. "You are the bravest person I know," Harrison told her one November afternoon as they walked together by the creek near his ranch. "Coming all this way, starting over with nothing but hope to sustain you." "I did not feel brave," Teresa admitted. "I felt desperate and scared most of the time." "Being brave does not mean you are not scared," Harrison said. "It means you do what needs doing even when you are terrified. That is courage, real courage." He showed her around his ranch in detail over several visits, explaining his plans for expansion, pointing out where he wanted to build a larger barn, where he thought a vegetable garden might flourish with proper tending. Teresa could see it all in her mind's eye, the future he was describing, and she could see herself in that future beside him. In December, the weather turned cold, unusual for California but not unheard of. Teresa learned to bank the fires in the boarding house stoves efficiently, to make hearty stews that would stick to the ribs of working men, to organize the household supplies so nothing went to waste during the winter months. Martha praised her progress regularly now, and Teresa felt pride in her growing competence. Harrison came to town through the cold and the occasional rain, and they spent their time together indoors now, sitting by the parlor fire while Martha worked in the kitchen and pretended not to be chaperoning. On Christmas Eve, Harrison brought Teresa a gift wrapped in plain paper and tied with string. "I made it myself," he said, looking nervous. "So it is probably not very good, but I wanted you to have something." Teresa unwrapped the package carefully to find a wooden box, small enough to hold in both hands, sanded smooth and polished to a soft sheen. The lid had been carved with surprising delicacy, showing a mare and foal standing beneath an oak tree. It was beautiful, clearly the work of many hours. "Harrison, this is wonderful," Teresa breathed, running her fingers over the carved surface. "You made this." "I work with wood some in the winter evenings when there is not enough light for other work," he said. "I thought you could keep your grandmother's music box in it, keep it safe." Teresa felt tears sting her eyes. It was such a thoughtful gift, so carefully made, so perfectly suited to her. She set the box carefully aside and threw her arms around Harrison, hugging him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "It is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me." She felt Harrison's arms come around her, holding her close, and they stayed like that for a long moment while the fire crackled in the grate and outside the cold December wind rattled the windows. Winter deepened, and with it, Teresa's love for Harrison grew deeper too. She found herself living for his visits, counting the days between them, falling asleep at night remembering his smile and the way he said her name. Martha watched with obvious approval, occasionally mentioning to Teresa that Harrison would make a fine husband, that he was the kind of man who would stand by his commitments. In February, on a bright cold day when the sky was impossibly blue, Harrison took Teresa riding out to a high point on his property that overlooked the valley. The view was spectacular, miles of rolling hills and distant mountains, the whole world spread out before them. "I wanted to show you this," Harrison said as they sat on their horses, looking out at the vista. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch. I come here when I need to think, or when I need to remember why I am working so hard to build something here." "It is beautiful," Teresa said, and it was true. The landscape had a harsh beauty that appealed to something in her soul. Harrison dismounted and came to help her down from her horse, his hands strong and sure on her waist. But instead of stepping back once she was on the ground, he kept his hands there, looking down at her with an expression that made her heart pound. "Teresa Voss," he said, his voice suddenly formal. "I am not much for fancy words or elaborate gestures. I am just a cowboy trying to build a horse ranch, and some years the work is harder than others. But I love you more than I thought I could love anyone. You have made me happier these past months than I have been in my whole life, and I cannot imagine a future without you in it." He released her waist to reach into his coat pocket, pulling out a small box. When he opened it, Teresa saw a simple gold band nestled inside, not fancy but solid and real, just like the man offering it. "Will you marry me?" Harrison asked. "Will you take a chance on building a life with me?" "Yes," Teresa said, the word bursting out of her without hesitation. "Yes, of course, yes." Harrison's face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen on him, and he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, warm against her skin. Then he was kissing her, deep and passionate, and Teresa kissed him back with all the love and joy flooding through her. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "You have made me the happiest man in California," he said. "When?" Teresa asked. "When can we marry?" "As soon as you want," Harrison replied. "Tomorrow, if you would have me that quickly." Teresa laughed, though she was only half joking. "I need at least a few weeks to make a proper dress and arrange things with Martha." "But not long, Harrison. I do not want to wait long." They decided on a date in late March, giving them 6 weeks to prepare. The news of their engagement spread through Quartz Hill like wildfire, and Teresa found herself the recipient of congratulations everywhere she went. The boarding house residents threw an impromptu celebration, with Walter the schoolteacher making an elaborate toast and the miners singing rowdy but good-natured songs about love and marriage. Martha was delighted, hugging Teresa tightly and saying she could not have hoped for a better match. "You will be happy with him," she said. "I know it in my bones. That boy will take care of you and treat you right." The weeks before the wedding flew by in a flurry of activity. Teresa worked with Martha to sew a wedding dress from fabric Harrison had insisted on buying for her, a beautiful cream-colored cotton that felt like luxury against her work-roughened hands. She learned to cook Harrison's favorite meals, practiced managing household accounts, and absorbed Martha's wisdom about running a home. Harrison came to town even more frequently than before, often bringing materials to start furnishing the ranch house properly for a wife. Together they chose curtains for the windows, dishes for the kitchen, a real iron bedstead to replace his simple cot. Teresa felt her new life taking shape, becoming real and tangible. "Are you nervous?" Martha asked one evening as Teresa sat sewing the hem of her wedding dress by lamplight. Teresa considered the question. "A little," she admitted. "Not about marrying Harrison, I am certain about that, but about being a good wife, about knowing how to run a household on my own, about not disappointing him." "You will be fine," Martha assured her. "Marriage is about growing together, learning together. No one expects you to know everything on your wedding day. Harrison certainly does not. He fell in love with you exactly as you are, remember that." The wedding took place on a beautiful late March morning in the small white church at the edge of town. Teresa wore her cream dress with a crown of wildflowers in her hair that Harrison had gathered himself from the hills around his ranch. Martha stood up with her, and Harrison had asked the blacksmith, a gruff but kind man named Tom, to serve as his witness. The ceremony was simple, the preacher's words familiar and comforting. But when Teresa looked into Harrison's eyes as they exchanged vows, she felt the weight and joy of the promises they were making. She was choosing this man, and he was choosing her, and together they would build something lasting. "I, Harrison, take you, Teresa, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Harrison said, his voice steady but emotional. "I promise to love you, to honor you, to stand by you in good times and hard times, for as long as we both live." "I, Teresa, take you, Harrison, to be my lawfully wedded husband," Teresa replied, and her voice was strong and sure. "I promise to love you, to support you, to build a life with you for as long as we both live." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison kissed her with such tenderness that Teresa felt tears spill down her cheeks. The small gathering of guests cheered, and then they were walking back down the aisle together as Mr. and Mrs. Newell, ready to begin their new life. Martha hosted a wedding breakfast at the boarding house, laying out a feast that must have taken her days to prepare. There was ham and eggs, fresh bread and butter, preserves and cake, and every good thing. The boarding house residents and various townsfolk came to wish them well, pressing small gifts into their hands, offering advice and jokes and genuine happiness for the newlywed couple. By mid-afternoon, Harrison loaded Teresa's belongings into his wagon, including the carefully packed quilts and the wooden box he had made her, and they set out for the ranch. Their ranch now, Teresa reminded herself. Her home. The ride was familiar, as Teresa had traveled it many times over the past months, but everything felt different now. She was not a visitor anymore. She was coming home to stay, to build a life, to create a future with the man she loved. When they arrived at the ranch house, Harrison surprised her by sweeping her up into his arms to carry her over the threshold. Teresa laughed, clinging to his shoulders, feeling simultaneously ridiculous and cherished. "Welcome home, Mrs. Newell," Harrison said as he set her down gently inside the house. "Home," Teresa repeated, and the word felt right and true. That night, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness that made Teresa feel treasured and safe. Harrison was patient and gentle, attuned to her inexperience and her nervousness. Afterward, lying in his arms in their new bed, Teresa felt a contentment she had never known before. This was where she belonged, she realized, not because of the place itself, but because of the man beside her. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Harrison replied, his arms tightening around her. More than words can say. The early days of their marriage were an adjustment. Teresa learned the rhythms of ranch life, so different from the boarding house. She woke before dawn to prepare breakfast, packed lunches for Harrison when he was working in the far pastures, tended the vegetable garden she had planted, and learned to care for chickens and the few milk cows Harrison kept. The work was hard, but Teresa found satisfaction in it. She learned to bake bread that rose high and golden, to cook stews that could sustain a working man, to preserve fruits and vegetables for the winter. She made curtains for every window, stitched quilts for their bed, turned the simple ranch house into a real home. Harrison praised her efforts constantly, marveling at how comfortable she made everything. "You are a natural at this," he would say, and Teresa would feel pride warm her chest. She was good at this life, she realized. Maybe she had never been graceful or refined, but she was strong and capable and determined, and those were the qualities that mattered out here. They settled into a routine that worked for both of them. Harrison managed the horses and the heavy outdoor work, while Teresa handled the house and the garden and the animals. But they worked together too, Harrison teaching Teresa about the horses, Teresa showing Harrison the account books she had begun keeping to track their income and expenses. "You are better at figures than I am," Harrison admitted, looking at her careful columns of numbers. "I never thought to track things so precisely." "It helps to see where the money goes," Teresa explained. "And it will help us plan for the future, know what we can afford and when." By summer, they had fallen into an easy partnership. They talked about everything, shared their hopes and worries, laughed together over meals and in the evenings when the work was done. Teresa learned Harrison's moods, could read the tension in his shoulders when he was worried about something, the light in his eyes when he was particularly pleased. Harrison learned her signs too, knew when she needed reassurance, when she needed space to work through something in her own mind, when she needed simply to be held. In August, Teresa realized she had missed her monthly courses. She said nothing at first, not wanting to raise hopes that might be dashed, but when another month passed and her body began to change in other ways, she knew. She was carrying Harrison's child. She told him one evening after supper as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Harrison, I have something to tell you." He turned to her immediately, hearing the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong," Teresa said quickly. "Quite the opposite. I am with child. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Harrison simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face, growing until he was grinning like a fool. "A baby, truly." "Truly," Teresa confirmed, and then she was laughing because Harrison had swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her protests that he would make her dizzy. "I am going to be a father," Harrison said wonderingly, setting her down carefully. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Teresa asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy?" Harrison cupped her face in his hands, his eyes bright. "Teresa, I am beyond happy. This is everything I wanted, a family with you, a child to raise and love and teach. This is the best news you could have given me." They talked late into the night about the baby, about names and nurseries and all the changes that would come. Harrison was already planning, talking about building a cradle, about expanding the house to add another room, about all the ways their lives would grow and change. Teresa's pregnancy progressed smoothly. She continued working as long as she could, though Harrison fussed over her constantly, worrying that she was doing too much. Martha came out to visit regularly, bringing supplies and advice and her steady, comforting presence. As winter approached and Teresa's belly grew round, they prepared for the baby's arrival. Harrison built a beautiful cradle from oak wood, sanding it smooth and carving small horses into the headboard. Teresa sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full of anticipation and love for this child she had not yet met. The baby came on a cold night in February, almost a full year after Harrison had proposed. The labor was long and difficult. attended by Martha and the town's doctor, a capable woman named Sarah Winters, who had delivered half the babies in Quartz Hill. Harrison wore a path in the kitchen floor, pacing while Teresa labored in their bedroom. But when the baby finally arrived, crying lustily and perfect, Harrison was called in immediately. Teresa lay exhausted but glowing, holding their son wrapped in one of her mother's quilts. "A boy," she said softly as Harrison knelt beside the bed, his eyes fixed on the tiny face peeking from the blanket. "We have a son." "He is perfect," Harrison whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's small hand. Tiny fingers immediately curled around Harrison's much larger finger, and Teresa saw tears slide down her husband's cheeks. Absolutely perfect. They named him James Robert Newell, after both their fathers, and he became the center of their world. Harrison was an attentive, loving father, marveling at every tiny development, every new expression. Teresa found motherhood challenging but deeply rewarding, learning to interpret James's cries, to soothe and feed and care for this precious new life. Life settled into a new rhythm around the baby. Teresa managed the household with James often tied to her back in a sling Martha had shown her how to make. Harrison continued working the ranch, but came in more frequently to check on his wife and son, to steal a few moments holding his boy. As James grew from infant to baby to toddler, the ranch prospered. Harrison's horses developed a reputation for quality, and buyers came from as far as San Francisco to look at his stock. Money was never plentiful, but it was steady, and they were able to save, to improve the ranch bit by bit, to plan for the future with confidence. When James was 2, Teresa discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy felt easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their daughter arrived in the spring, a tiny thing with her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes. They named her Martha Rose, after Teresa's aunt, and the wild roses that bloomed around the ranch each year. Their family felt complete now, 2 children to raise and love and teach. The ranch house rang with laughter and occasional tears, with the sounds of childhood and family life. Harrison proved to be a patient, playful father, spending his evenings after work playing with the children, teaching James about horses and animals, rocking Martha to sleep with gentle songs. Teresa looked at her life sometimes and marveled at how far she had come from that desperate girl on a broken wagon. She had a husband who loved her, children who filled her heart, a home that was truly hers. She had built a life that mattered, not through grace or refinement, but through honesty and hard work and staying true to herself. "What are you thinking?" Harrison asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching James play in the yard while Martha slept in Teresa's arms. "I was thinking about the day we met," Teresa said. "How terrified I was, how uncertain about everything, and look at us now." Harrison reached over to take her hand, his touch as warm and sure as it had been that first day. "I knew that day," he said. "Watching you pick yourself up out of the dust, seeing the determination in your eyes despite being scared. I knew you were someone special, someone real." "You saw something in me I did not see in myself," Teresa replied. "I saw what was always there," Harrison corrected gently. "You just needed to see it too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and orange. James came running up to show them an interesting rock he had found, his face alight with joy. Harrison pulled their son onto his lap, examining the rock with serious attention while James explained its virtues. Teresa watched them together and felt her heart swell with love for her family, for this life they had built together. The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. James grew tall and strong, inheriting his father's way with horses and his mother's head for figures. Martha proved spirited and creative, filling the house with drawings and songs and endless questions about everything. Harrison and Teresa worked side by side, building their ranch into something substantial and lasting, a legacy for their children and the generations to come. On their 10th anniversary, Harrison took Teresa back to the high point overlooking the valley where he had proposed. The children were spending the day with Aunt Martha in town, giving their parents a rare day alone together. "Remember this place?" Harrison asked as they stood looking out at the familiar vista. "I remember everything about that day," Teresa said. "I remember how nervous you were, how your hands shook when you showed me the ring." "I was terrified you would say no," Harrison admitted. "I never could have said no," Teresa replied. "You were offering me everything I had ever wanted, even when I did not know I wanted it." Harrison pulled her close, and they stood wrapped in each other's arms, looking out at the land they had built a life on. "I would do it all again," he said. "Every hard day, every challenge, every struggle, all of it was worth it to have this, to have you and our family." "Me too," Teresa whispered. "I would choose you every single time." They kissed as the wind whispered through the grass around them, and Teresa thought about that first kiss at the harvest dance, how far they had come since then, how much they had built together. She was still not graceful or refined, still rough-edged and plain-spoken, still more comfortable with hard work than polite society. But Harrison had been right all those years ago. Being real, being honest, being true to herself, that had been enough. More than enough. As they rode back to the ranch together, Teresa thought about the future stretching ahead of them. James would grow up to run the ranch someday, she hoped, with Martha perhaps settling nearby with a family of her own. There would be grandchildren eventually, new generations to teach and love, new stories to add to the family legacy. There would be hard times too, she knew, because life was never without challenges. But they would face those times together, just as they had faced everything else, with honesty and determination and love. When they reached the ranch house, with its cheerful curtains in the windows and the garden Teresa had tended for years thriving in the afternoon sun, Harrison helped her down from her horse and held her close for a long moment. "Welcome home, Mrs. Newell," he said, just as he had on their wedding day. "Home," Teresa repeated, and the word still felt as right and true as it had then. This was home, not because of the place itself, but because of the people in it, because of the love that filled every corner, because she and Harrison had built it together from nothing but hope and hard work, and staying real in a world that often valued appearance over substance. That evening, after collecting the children from town and sharing dinner together, after putting James and Martha to bed with the usual stories and kisses and tucked blankets, Teresa and Harrison sat together on their porch as the stars came out overhead. Harrison's arm was around her shoulders, and Teresa leaned into his warmth, content and happy and grateful for the life they had created. "I love you," Harrison said quietly, as he had said countless times before and would say countless times again. "I love you too," Teresa replied. And those simple words contained everything, the past and the present and the future, all the struggles and triumphs, all the ordinary moments and extraordinary ones that made up their life together. In the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon, and one of the horses whinnied softly from the barn. The night was cool and peaceful, and Teresa breathed it in, this moment of perfect contentment, knowing that this was what she had traveled so far to find. Not wealth or status or refined graces, but this. A real love with a good man, a home they had built together, children to raise, and a future full of promise. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns as Teresa and Harrison sat together. Two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen to build something lasting in the wild California hills, who had proven that being real, being honest, being true, was indeed rarer and more valuable than all the graceful refinement in the world. And as the night deepened and they finally rose to go inside, to their home and their life together, Teresa knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly where she belonged.